Hello and welcome to yet another video, and in this video I have one of my favorite cameras to share with you guys. It's this camera right here. That's right, it's a 4/3 camera. It's the Olympus E420. Now this camera came out way back in 2008, but it still is a very nice camera to use, and the one that I've been enjoying using lately and have been taking it to so many places lately. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into the video. So the Olympus E420, now this camera came out way back in 2008, but despite its age, for the general field of photography, if you're only focusing on the general field of photography, it will deliver more than good enough results for most of those parts. I say most because, well, it came out as an entry-level DSLR in 2008, and due to its technology, it might not be, good or fast enough for a certain type of photography. I will discuss that more later in the video, and just like in any of my other My Thoughts video, I'll be dividing this video into 3 different sections. The first one is the ergonomics and the operational side of things, and then I'll lead down into the image quality and then into my conclusion, why I still recommend this camera and why I don't recommend it. Yes, there are actually quite a few reasons why I don't recommend this camera as well, not only due to its technology, but also some features that it might not really be suitable for some of the shooters out there, even though you're just, starting out. So let's first start with the ergonomics and the operational side of things. This camera, despite its small size, it's actually a very comfortable camera to use. Of course, I cannot fit all of my fingers on there, but it is still kind of molded and shaped really nicely that when you grip on it, it actually grips really, really nicely and comfortably like a glove. The only downside about it is just these 2 flimsy strap holders. I'm not sure the name for it, but yeah, it's quite flimsy. But otherwise, yeah, the buttons are really nicely designed and they're all in a really logically arranged layout. And also the dial up here, yes, it's easy to kind of rotate, but in the same time, there's a little bit of the distance between your thumb and the wheel here anyway, so you will not really be knocking it that easily, despite it's a little bit slippery as well. Otherwise, yeah, everything is just pretty much at your fingertips, and being such a minimalistic camera, and also very low on feature camera, all of the main buttons, all of the essential buttons are pretty much at your fingertips, which is something that I really love. So rarely did I actually have to go into the menu system to just arrange or set certain functions. So yeah, if you're just shooting on the street, or if you're just doing some landscape photography, cityscape photography, some basic street photography, things like that, it's all at your fingertips, that you don't really have to take your fingers away too much or take your eyes away too much from the actual view. So that's something that I really love using on this camera, and also something that I really appreciate on this particular camera. Now this camera, despite its age, it's actually one of the earlier DSLRs that pioneered the live view feature, which is something that I really appreciate. In 2008, there weren't a lot of cameras that actually gives you this live view feature, but because it is one of the earlier DSLRs that gives you live view features, it's actually very laggy as well. That being said, if you're just, focusing on certain subjects on the tripod, or just focusing on certain subjects that aren't moving a lot, that's completely okay. You will still be able to judge your frame quite nicely. You will be able to judge your exposure composition quite nicely as well. Just that once you start moving the camera too much, or if your subject starts moving too much, you will see a little bit of blurriness, and it just doesn't live quite up to even the standards of the live view feature from 10 years ago. So yeah, just keep in mind, it's good that they have it, but it's just not up to certain expectations. On another point is the menu system. The menu system is actually quite nicely laid out. Yes, the camera is very simple on its own, very basic, so there aren't a lot of features to really cram into the menu, but even when you do have to access the menu, everything is just very nicely laid out, very organized, and just, the text, they all just have very nice fonts to it as well, because the screen isn't a really high resolution screen, and having very clear text there is something that I really appreciate, especially when I do work with a lot of the older cameras as well, that this camera actually has a very clear text layout. So yeah, there is that. But talking about the screen, what I love about the screen of this camera is after a while of shooting, the screen doesn't really go completely blank before it goes completely dark or shuts off due to like automatic turn off or things like that. It will actually turn into like a natural looking display. So it's still on, you still can see the functions and features or the settings on there, but it's just in a more natural display mode, which means, you know, it's kind of like looking at one of those older graphical calculators or one of those older watches that has the natural display. So yeah, it's very low tech and it's also very low on energy consumption. And talking about energy consumption, the battery on here actually lasts for a very long time. So assuming you don't use the live view feature that often, you know, I've been using this camera for the past 2 weeks with just one battery in there, and to be honest, it's not even lower than 50% yet. So yeah, that's a really testament to, you know, older DSLRs, that they don't require a lot of power to be, you know, powering the actual system, because the viewfinder in here is optical and you're not going to be using the live view feature most of the time anyway. So the camera therefore requires very little amount of energy coming out of the battery. So that's something to consider if you're looking to one of these cameras. And also, being one of the cameras where Olympus used the same series of batteries for multiple of their cameras, it's still very easy to find these batteries for very low prices nowadays if you're looking for this camera. Moving on to the side, you have dual card slots. A lot of people really make huge fuss about, you know, dual card slots, but on this particular camera, despite being an entry-level camera, you do have dual card slots. The only downside is that you cannot write redundancy on those cards. So if you have 2 cards in there, it will actually just write into one and then go into the other, but not both in the same time. So there is that. And it takes CF cards, which is my favorite form of media storage. And then it also takes the XD card, which is Olympus's memory cards at the time, but I don't have that, so I'm only using CF cards in there for now. And this camera will be able to shoot at around 3.5 frames per second, which is actually not bad, but it will only be limited to around 6 pictures if you're shooting in RAW, but unlimited if you're shooting JPEG, depending on the read and write speed of your actual card in there. So make sure you have proper read and write speed if you want to do continuous shooting for unlimited amount of shots in JPEG. So just keep that in mind. Moving on to the front, you'll see that this camera takes, well, it has a 4/3 sensor, so it takes the 4/3 lenses, natively speaking. So yeah, there is that. But otherwise, the viewfinder is a very small viewfinder, so something that you might not be used to if you're coming from, you know, a semi-professional DSLR body is it will feel like looking through a tunnel, and that can be a little bit uncomfortable as well. I just wish that the viewfinder, at least on the inside, would be a little bit bigger, because despite having this size, if you look through the viewfinder, there is even a smaller frame inside, so that needs a bit of time to get used to as well. And why I'm saying if you're coming from a semi-professional DSLR, you might need a bit of time to get used to, is because this is a very fun camera to use. And sure, I have Sony full-frame cameras and Canon full-frame cameras, but just because I have those doesn't mean I don't carry this camera along with me. I do, simply because it's a very nice, fun camera to use, and it actually helps me to get a much more fresh perspective of different scenes and different scenarios as well. So yeah, there is that. Whew. And then the last point is the flash. This flash is a little bit low and very close to the lens, especially if you use one of the even smaller lenses from Olympus, which means if you're taking portraits with this flash, with those lenses, there's a very high chance of having red eye. And yeah, if you're going for the more retro look with red eye effect, things like that, that is probably good for you. But if you don't like the red eye effect, you know, the flash, I wish it would just be a bit higher and further away from the lens. So yeah, there is that. Otherwise, there's not really much else to nitpick. It's a very fun, very nice camera to use. Look at the screen, it's actually still on, but it just went into the natural mode. And yeah, you still can see the basic features with your naked eye, but otherwise it also saves on a lot of power. And then if you want to activate the screen again, just kind of press half, and then the screen is back to, you know, full brightness again. And of course, you still can adjust the brightness if you want it brighter or lower or dimmer later in the menu system. But just keep in mind that when you do adjust the brightness of the screen, the exposure will look different on your images as well. So yeah, and now onto the image quality. The image quality on this camera is really, really nice. Of course, being an old camera, there are things to be aware of. So first of all, I would never use higher than ISO 400 on this particular camera. If you're working or if you're very sensitive to noise, I would not go higher than 200. But because I'm just, you know, doing some basic street photography here and there, doing some basic cityscape photography here and there with this particular camera, I am okay with ISO 400. But going higher than ISO 400, you will definitely start seeing a lot of color noise coming in. Now, of course, if you're more into like those rusty and rough kind of images, you can go higher than ISO 400. But with this camera, I really, I'm only fine with up to ISO 400 really. And that can actually be quite challenging when there are a lot of contrast in the scene, because when there are really high contrast in the scene, using over ISO 400, you will start to see a lot of noise. Even already at ISO 200, you will be seeing a lot of noise, especially in the dark area of that particular high contrast scene. So yeah, just be aware of that. And another thing to be aware of is moire and aliasing. It's very apparent on this camera, so just be careful if you're shooting a lot of you know, very fine patterns. Luckily, I don't shoot a lot of fine patterns with this particular camera, so there's not really much to be careful of on that front. And also, if you're using live view in this particular camera, the sensor itself, it's not as fast as modern cameras or even cameras from 5 years ago at focusing. So be careful of that. But otherwise, the color rendition, the color reproduction out of the sensor is really nice. The dynamic range, assuming you know what you're working with and assuming you know the camera's limitation, the dynamic range is still very much okay. If you still need to, you know, recover some highlights and shadows, you still can do that without, you know, breaking the image in post, like assuming if you actually shoot in RAW. So yeah, just be careful, but in most case scenarios, the dynamic range is still more than good enough. And then the skin tone on this camera is actually very nice. You know, for a 4/3 sensor, I have to admit that when I got into the sensor size, I got into the sensor size from the Panasonic side of things, and the Panasonic cameras, they never really had good skin tones. But when I first tried Olympus cameras, they really do a good job of rendering skin tones, and I think you will really love the color science coming out of Olympus's cameras, whether it's the newer mirrorless cameras or even the older DSLRs. They have very unique way of rendering colors, and it looks really warm. Not too warm, but just warm in a really cozy way, which is something that I really appreciate out of this camera and also many other Olympus's cameras in general. So another Olympus camera that I really enjoy using is this E300. Of course, it has a very different sensor technology than the E420, but it's also a very nice old DSLR to really take a look at as well. Although this is generally cheaper, just saying. But yeah, otherwise, there's not much to complain. If you're really looking for a nostalgic, older sensor technology, well, the look of it, the characteristics of it, yeah, still have that really robust file up to a certain extent, then this camera is actually a camera to really look for. And there's not really much to complain about the image quality on this particular camera. And 10 megapixels is definitely more than enough if you're just, you know, printing A3, A2 size pictures or just posting your pictures on the social media platforms or certain websites, things like that. And yeah, now I would like to actually lead down into the conclusion of this video. I would like to actually touch on the points why I don't recommend this camera first, before leading down into the recommendation parts. So why I don't recommend this camera? Well, it's not that it's a bad camera. but it's just more about the system in general. There aren't a lot of native lenses available for this particular system. It's not the micro four thirds, it's just the 4/3. Yes, it's the same sensor size, but it's the DSLR version. The mirrorless version, like the OMD system cameras, they have a lot of lenses available already, but with this particular system, unless you find, or unless the system already has the lenses that you want, it's going to be hard to find good native lenses, well, native lenses that are good for most fields. There are like the kit lenses and some prime lenses which are okay, but I understand that nowadays a lot of people have certain niches that they would like to dive into, and there's a very high chance that you won't be able to find those, and if you do, the price might be quite high because there weren't a lot of supply of those lenses either. Another downside on using this particular camera is there's no like sort of IBIS built into the sensor, and a lot of the lenses don't have IS as well. So just keep that in mind when you're photographing in, let's say, low light conditions. Just make sure you have fast enough shutter speed, or your hands would be very, very steady, or you're just putting it on the tripod, things like that, because there's no vibration compensation, there's no IBIS, there's nothing to compensate for the shaky hand. Yeah, just be aware of that. But onto the positive thing is, overall, it is still a very fun camera to use, and the colors that you get out of this camera is actually very nice. Not only this particular camera, but Olympus's whole color science in general, they're actually very nice. The color rendition, the color reproduction, the color depth, they're all very nice. And I would just highly recommend you to actually try any of those cameras, or just go for the E300 as well. It's a little bit more expensive, but you get a very unique color from that as well, because it is a Kodak made CCD sensor in there versus, the normal sensor in here. But yeah, anyway, with this particular system, if you're patient enough, you usually can get it for a bargain, because if you tend to go for the buy it now options, they tend to still be running around between 80 euros to 120 euros with kit lenses. If you're patient enough and kind of like wait for the bidding, things like that, you usually can find it around 40 to 60 euros. I got mine for 45 euros with these two kit lenses, because at the time Olympus liked to supply these two kit lenses as well. So that's another benefit, really. So not only that you get the wide, well, standard wide to standard telephoto of 14 to 42, which is an equivalent of 28 to 84, but you also get this, which is kind of like a mini telephoto zoom. This is the 40 to 150, which is an equivalent to 80 to 300 millimeter zoom. So yeah, and you have such powers, like powerful zooms already in your camera bag in this size, so that's really a nice advantage. So yeah, that's it for this video. I hope you can actually gain something from this video. It's not a full review video, it doesn't have video mode, but I still hope that you still can gain something from this video based on my thoughts, things like that. If you need a free photography guidebook, or just want to watch like actual photography courses, it's available on my website as well. The links are down in the description section below. Just click and download. If you have anything to share, any suggestions, any recommendations, any stories, feel free to just comment that down in the comment section below as well. Otherwise, I thank you all very much for watching. Stay safe, have fun shooting. Till next time, bye for now.